Jake's voice carried a hint of frustration as he leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his eyes closely following Crystal's every movement. She was by the bedroom mirror, carefully applying her lipstick, her reflection calm and composed. Without breaking her focus, Crystal gave a slight shrug. "I know it's a drag, but this new project has the firm breathing down my neck," she replied, capping the lipstick and turning towards him with a carefully crafted smile. "I'll be overwhelmed all weekend if I don't finish it tonight." Jake felt his stomach twist, a wave of unease washing over him. He stayed silent for a moment, watching as Crystal slipped into her red heels. She was dressed impeccably, her sleek red dress clung to her figure, her hair cascaded in soft waves, and her makeup was flawless, too flawless for a late night at the office. "But it's Valentine's Day," Jake murmured, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "I thought we could do something together tonight." Crystal adjusted her earrings, turning to him with a nonchalant air. "We will, Jake, just not tonight, okay? We'll make up for it next weekend, I promise." She crossed the room, leaning in to give him a quick peck on the cheek, her lips barely touching his skin. Her scent lingered, expensive perfume she rarely wore to work. Jake noticed a flicker of excitement in her eyes, but it wasn't the kind meant for a night of paperwork. Something didn't feel right. "You're really dressed up for the office," he commented casually, though his eyes were sharp, studying her. "Is there a reason?" Crystal barely paused as she grabbed her purse from the chair. "Oh, it's nothing. I just wanted to feel good." "It's been a tough week." Jake watched her closely, his instincts screaming that there was more to the story. He nodded, unconvinced. "Just don't work too late. I'll order something in and wait up for you. I'll try," Crystal replied over her shoulder, already halfway out the door. She turned back one last time, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Love you." The door clicked shut, leaving Jake in a heavy silence. He stared at the door for a long moment, trying to process the discomfort that had settled in his chest. Something about her tone and the way she looked at him felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced this conversation in her mind before saying it out loud. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. The past few weeks had been filled with subtle but troubling changes in Crystal's behavior. She'd grown distant, her phone was always in her hand, and she often came home late with flimsy excuses about meetings or traffic. He had tried convincing himself it was just work stress, but tonight was Valentine's Day. No job was worth missing the one evening they were supposed to be together, and no one puts in that kind of effort just to sit under fluorescent lights. Jake sat at the kitchen table, pulling out his phone. He opened their shared calendar and checked the days she had been working late. The dates didn't match their usual deadlines, they seemed random, without any clear pattern. Doubt crept in as he stared at the screen, his mind spinning. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid," he thought, shaking his head. But deep down he knew he wasn't. The signs had been there all along, subtle but undeniable. He had just been too scared to confront them. His finger hovered over her contact, the urge to call her, to hear her voice, and ask her directly burning inside him. But he hesitated. If she was hiding something, she'd have a story ready, she always did. Instead, Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind racing as he replayed their conversations, trying to pinpoint when things had started to feel wrong. It wasn't just one thing, it was a collection of little changes: too many late nights at work, too many missed dinners, too many insincere smiles. "She's not at the office," Jake realized suddenly, the thought hitting him like a ton of bricks. Not tonight. Something clicked in his mind, and his heart began to race. He stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the kitchen. He couldn't just sit here, waiting for answers that wouldn't come. If Crystal was lying about her whereabouts, there was only one way to discover the truth. Grabbing his jacket and keys, Jake hurried out the door. The cold night air hit his skin, but he barely noticed his mind was buzzing with adrenaline. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Crystal, running a bit later than I thought. "Don't wait up for me. Love you." Jake clenched his teeth. The lie was so casual, so perfectly placed, she'd already covered her tracks, but she didn't realize he was on them. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, he was about to confirm the one thing he'd feared for weeks. Jake rushed to his car, his heart pounding as he backed out of the driveway. Crystal's faint perfume still lingered, as if mocking him, reminding him of what he was about to uncover. This is it, he thought, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He didn't know exactly what he would find, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Jake kept his headlights off as he tailed Crystal's black sedan from a safe distance, his eyes glued to her car, his hands steady, even though his mind was racing. She was driving across town, not in the direction of her office like she had claimed. Jake's stomach tightened with every streetlight they passed. The scenery shifted gone were the familiar buildings of their neighborhood and the bustling office parks near Crystal's work. Instead, the area turned into sleek, upscale high-rises and luxury hotels, the kind of places you don't just stumble upon. What is she doing? He wondered, though deep down he already knew. Crystal's car slowed as it neared the entrance of the Grand Marquis Hotel, one of the city's most exclusive venues. Jake felt a sharp sting in his chest, his jaw clenching as he pulled his car into a shadowy corner of the parking lot, far enough to stay hidden but close enough to keep an eye on her. From his concealed spot, he watched Crystal step out of her car, moving quickly. She glanced at her reflection in the window, fixing her hair. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she adjusted her dress and glanced toward the hotel entrance. Everything about her movements was deliberate and calculated. She's not meeting someone for work, Jake thought bitterly, his stomach churning as the reality hit home. Crystal headed toward the hotel, her heels clicking against the pavement, her steps quick and purposeful. The eager energy in her walk made Jake feel sick. His mind was racing, but his body felt paralyzed as he watched her disappear through the lobby doors, his eyes locked on her until she was out of sight. This can't be happening. Jake stayed in his car for a few moments, his heart hammering as if it might burst. He told himself he could leave now, pretend he hadn't seen anything, but he knew he couldn't. He needed to know who she was meeting, he needed proof. Grabbing his phone, Jake took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. He moved with determination, though each step felt heavier than the last. His mind replayed all the times Crystal had told him she was working late, all the excuses that now felt flimsy and false. The signs had been there for weeks, maybe even months, but he had ignored them, hoping for the best. Now, he couldn't look away anymore. Jake slipped into the hotel through a side entrance, avoiding the lobby where he might be spotted. He found a secluded corner in the hallway, allowing him to watch the main entrance without drawing attention. His body was tense as he waited, eyes fixed on the lobby. He didn't know how long he'd be standing there, but time was irrelevant, only the truth mattered now. And then he saw her. Crystal stepped out of the elevator, laughing, but she wasn't alone. She was arm in arm with a tall, well-dressed man who looked like he'd just walked off the pages of a magazine. Jake's heart dropped as he watched the man lean in and kiss her. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss, it was deep, intimate, the kind of kiss shared only by lovers. Jake's world crumbled in an instant. Every bit of trust, every promise they'd made was shattered in that one moment. He felt his chest tighten, his breaths turning into short, ragged gasps as he struggled to steady himself. But nothing could have prepared him for this. "You've got to be kidding me," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, snapping a few photos of the scene before him. He needed proof, though the image of what he'd seen was already burned into his mind forever. Crystal and the man walked toward a hotel room, still laughing, still close. Jake couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. Their body language said it all. He stood there, frozen, unable to move, watching them for what felt like forever, though it was only minutes. His mind was flooded with conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, sorrow. He wanted to burst in, to confront them, to demand answers, to yell at Crystal for her lies and for destroying everything they had. But something held him back. Not here, not now. Jake knew he had to leave. He'd seen enough to confirm his worst suspicions. As much as he wanted to confront them and tear down the facade, he also knew he needed time to think, to plan. He turned and quickly walked back to his car, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his keys. Once inside, he sat for a moment, staring at the hotel in disbelief. His phone buzzed with another message from Crystal: "Working late. Don't wait up. Love you," Jake scoffed, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He didn't reply, just dropped his phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine, the noise cutting through the thick tension clouding his mind. It's over. He knew then that there was no going back. He had seen too much. Jake didn't drive straight home after leaving the hotel. His thoughts were too jumbled, too consumed with anger and betrayal to just go back and sit in the house they once shared. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, his mind sharpened with every second. He couldn't just let this slide. Crystal had taken everything from him emotionally, and now it was his turn to take everything from her. Making a sharp right turn, Jake headed to the bank. As he pulled into the nearly deserted parking lot, the flickering fluorescent lights outside cast a faint, eerie glow. He parked and sat for a moment, taking deep breaths, his heart racing, but his resolve clear. He wouldn't be the one left with nothing. Jake walked into the bank, approaching the counter with a cold, determined expression. The teller greeted him with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" she asked. "I need to transfer all the funds from my joint account to my personal account immediately," Jake said, his voice low and steady, without a hint of doubt. The teller, slightly surprised by his abruptness, nodded and began the process. "I'll need your ID and account information," so Jake handed over his driver's license, and as the teller typed, he felt the weight of his decision. Years of savings, everything they'd set aside for the future, was about to vanish from Crystal's grasp, and Jake didn't feel a shred of guilt. "This will just take a moment," the teller said, glancing at the screen. Jake watched the seconds tick away on the wall clock, each one distancing him further from the life he had shared with Crystal. Finally, the teller spoke up. "All done. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Jake shook his head, replying, "No, that'll be all. Thanks." He grabbed the receipt and headed out, the cool night air hitting him as he walked back to his car. But he wasn't finished, not yet. As Jake drove through the city, his mind raced with thoughts of the next step in his plan. Crystal hadn't just betrayed him with deceit, she had made a fool of him. He wasn't about to let her return home and pretend nothing had happened. He was determined to ensure she had nothing left. The locksmith shop was a small, nondescript building on a street corner. Jake pulled up, parked, and stormed inside, barely containing his anger. "I need all the locks changed tonight," Jake demanded, his voice cold, leaving no doubt he wasn't asking for a favor. The locksmith, an older man with graying hair and tired eyes, raised an eyebrow at Jake's urgency. "That's a bit of a rush job, don't you think?" "We're closing soon." Jake pulled out his wallet and slapped several extra bills onto the counter. "I don't care how late it is, do it now." The locksmith eyed the money, then sighed. "All right, give me your address. I'll be there in an hour." Jake rattled off the address and left without another word, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel as he drove home, his mind a mix of anger and dark satisfaction. By the time Jake got home, he had cooled off slightly, but the fire of vengeance still burned inside him. He paced around the house, reflecting on everything they had built together, the photos on the walls, the furniture they had chosen as a couple. It all felt tainted, every corner of the house stained with the memory of their broken promises. The locksmith arrived right on time, his van pulling into the driveway with a soft creak. Jake nodded in greeting and led him to the front door. "Change every lock, front door, back door, all of them," Jake instructed, his voice sharp. The locksmith gave him a cautious look, but began working without hesitation, the sound of metal tools clinking echoing in the quiet house. While the locksmith worked, Jake started collecting Crystal's belongings. He didn't bother being careful. Her clothes were yanked from the closet and crammed into garbage bags, her expensive dresses wrinkling as they were shoved inside. He grabbed her shoes, her jewelry box, even the sentimental trinkets from her nightstand, framed photos, little souvenirs from their vacations. Everything went into the bags, each item tossed with a sense of finality. Once the bags were filled, Jake dragged them out to the front lawn, dumping them carelessly onto the grass. Her life, everything she had once valued, was now lying out in the open for all to see. Back inside, Jake grabbed a notepad from the kitchen drawer and quickly scrawled a few cutting words, his anger fueling every stroke. "You cheated on me. Now pay the price. Guess what? You're homeless. I'm going to sleep with your best friend." Jake read it over, a bitter smile spreading across his face. This wasn't just about hurting her, it was about showing her that he was done being the fool. He walked back outside and pinned the note to the front door, making sure it was firmly in place. As he stood there, staring at the bags of her things and the cruel note hanging in plain sight, a wave of satisfaction washed over him. The locksmith finished his work, giving Jake a nod as he packed up. "All done. New keys are inside," the man said before driving off into the night. Jake remained on the porch for a moment, surveying the scene he had created. The house felt different now, like a fortress that no longer welcomed Crystal. The locks were changed, and the atmosphere was thick with the weight of what Jake had done. But he wasn't finished yet. He walked inside, grabbed his phone, and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. As the phone rang, Jake's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a strange sense of freedom. He wasn't the victim anymore. The line clicked, and a familiar voice answered. "Hey, Tiffany," Jake said, his tone calm but charged with purpose. "Want to grab a drink tonight?" There was a brief pause, followed by a soft laugh. "Jake, this is unexpected. I'd love to." Jake smirked. "Perfect. I'll pick you up in an hour." Hanging up, Jake felt a finality settle within him. Crystal had thought she could deceive him and face no consequences, but she was wrong. This was just the start. Crystal pulled into the driveway after her wild night, her hands still entwined with her lover's. The evening had been perfect until she saw the bags. Her heart nearly stopped at the sight of her clothes and personal items strewn across the front lawn like discarded trash. Panic gripped her, the warmth of the night replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in her gut. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice quivering as she stopped the car, eyes wide with shock. She let go of her lover's hand and stepped out, her legs unsteady, her pulse pounding in her ears as she slowly approached the house, struggling to believe what she was seeing. Ryan, her lover, stood behind her, his face pale, hands awkwardly shoved into his pockets. He stayed silent, unsure of what to say. He had followed her to the door but hesitated, sensing the storm that was about to break. Crystal rushed to the door, her heart racing in her chest. She grabbed the handle, her fingers trembling. Come on," she muttered under her breath, tugging harder, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked tight. She tried again, banging her fist against the door in frustration. "Jake," she called, her voice frantic, but there was no response. Then she noticed the note pinned to the front door. Her breath caught as she tore it from the nail, her hands shaking as she unfolded it. The words scrawled across the page hit her like a punch to the gut. "You cheated on me. Now pay the price. Guess what? You're homeless. I'm going to sleep with your best friend." Tears filled Crystal's eyes as she clutched the note, her hands trembling. She read it again, her mind struggling to process the harsh reality of the words. It felt like her entire world had crumbled in a single moment. This wasn't what she expected. Jake was supposed to be clueless, the sweet, trusting husband who never doubted her. No, Crystal whispered, her voice breaking. She turned to Ryan, her eyes wide with desperation. "What do I do?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his face drained of color. He glanced around as if searching for an answer in the shadows of the street. "I don't know, Crystal. Maybe you should call him," he said, his voice uncertain. This was far from the drama he had anticipated. Crystal fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so much she nearly dropped it. She dialed Jake's number, her heart pounding. She barely breathed as she pressed the phone to her ear, silently begging for him to answer, hoping there was still a way to fix what she had done. Jake answered on the first ring. "Jake, please let me explain," Crystal pleaded, her voice frantic, tears already welling in her eyes. She struggled to speak, her words choked by the overwhelming emotion bubbling inside her. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and for a fleeting second, Crystal thought he might listen, that there was still a chance to repair the damage. But when Jake finally spoke, his voice was cold and distant, as if he didn't recognize her. "Explain what, Crystal? That you've been lying to me? That you're a cheater? There's nothing left to explain. You're done. We're done. Have a nice life." Crystal's knees gave way slightly, and she leaned against the side of the house for support. "No, Jake, please. It's not what you think. I messed up, but we need to talk. We can fix this, just let me explain," she pleaded, her voice breaking as tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. She wiped her face frantically, trying to regain her composure, but it was pointless. Everything was slipping away. Jake's bitter laugh echoed through the phone, sending a chill down her spine. "Talk? You think there's anything left to discuss? You've been sleeping with another man, Crystal. What's there to say? You made your choice. Now live with it." Crystal glanced at Ryan, who stood awkwardly on the porch, hands still buried in his pockets, eyes cast down. He hadn't moved or spoken, just silently witnessing her life fall apart, unsure of how to react. "Where are you?" Jake Crystal asked desperately. "We can't just leave it like this. Please just come home so we can talk." Jake's voice hardened, each word dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, you'll find out where I am soon enough. But since you're so curious, I'll give you a little clue. I'm spending the weekend in paradise. Thought I deserved a break after discovering my wife's a cheat." Crystal's stomach dropped, her mind racing to catch up. "Jake," where the line went quiet for a moment, then Jake delivered the final blow with icy calm. "Oh, and I'm not alone. Guess who's with me? Your best friend Tiffany. Thought we'd catch up while you figure out where you're going to live now." Crystal's breath hitched, and she couldn't speak for a moment, her mind spinning. "Tiffany? No, that couldn't be right. Her best friend. It didn't make sense. "You're lying," she shouted into the phone, her voice trembling with disbelief. She couldn't process it, she didn't want to. The thought of Jake and Tiffany together was too much a nightmare she couldn't escape. But Jake wasn't bluffing, his voice was firm and unyielding. "Think I'm lying? Why don't you call her and see where she is tonight? You'll find out soon enough, Crystal," just like I did. Crystal's heart pounded as her mind spun out of control. This couldn't be real, she had lost everything in a single night. But before she could say another word, before she could even try to plead her case, Jake hung up. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Crystal stood there, staring at her phone, her chest rising and falling in short, panicked breaths. She was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face as she sank to her knees on the front lawn, her belongings scattered around her like pieces of a life she no longer owned. Ryan stepped forward, awkwardly placing a hand on her shoulder, but the gesture felt hollow. He didn't know what to say or how to fix this. "Crystal, maybe we should go," he said gently, though his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. Crystal didn't respond. She couldn't. Everything was gone, and there was no one to blame but herself. She stood frozen on the lawn, her entire world unraveling before her. The phone lay shattered at her feet, its screen cracked, just like the life she thought she had. She stared at the broken pieces of glass, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. Jake, her husband, was gone, and not just gone, but with her best friend. "How could he do this to me?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind rustling through the trees. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were no longer tears of sadness. They were filled with rage, pure, boiling anger rising from the depths of her soul. Ryan stood a few steps away, watching her in uncomfortable silence, unsure of what to say or do. He had been drawn to the thrill, the excitement of sneaking around, but now that it had all blown up, he had no idea how to handle it. "Crystal, we should go." This is a mess," Ryan muttered, nervously scratching the back of his head. Ryan's voice wavered, and for a moment he seemed to regret ever getting involved. He took a hesitant step forward, reaching for her arm. "Let's just leave. We'll figure this out later," but Crystal yanked her arm away, turning to him with wild, angry eyes. "Figure it out? You think we can just walk away from this? He's gone, Ryan. He took everything, my money, my house, my life, and now he's off with Tiffany, my best friend." Her voice cracked, and anger poured out in waves. Ryan recoiled, dropping his hand to his side. "Crystal, I didn't know it would go this far. I thought we were just what." Crystal snapped, cutting him off. "Having fun? A fling? Well, congratulations, Ryan, you've ruined everything." She wiped the tears from her face, smudging her mascara in the process. Her mind raced, scrambling to form a plan, any plan, to salvage the remains of her broken life. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Jake relaxed in a luxurious beach chair, the warm sun casting golden light on his face. He stretched out, feeling the soft sand under his feet, while sipping a tall, fruity cocktail, the sound of ocean waves crashing softly against the shore filling his ears. Freedom at last. Next to him, Tiffany reclined in her own chair, a satisfied smile on her lips as she gazed out at the horizon. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, looking every bit the part of a woman who had left her old life behind without a backward glance. "Cheers to a fresh start," Jake said, lifting his glass toward her. He was at ease, a smug grin spreading across his face as he soaked up the tropical paradise. His plan had gone off without a hitch. Crystal never saw it coming. Tiffany raised her glass in return, clinking it against his with a soft laugh. "You really pulled it off, Jake. I have to say, I didn't think you had it in you." Jake chuckled, taking another sip. It was time. She made her choices, now we get to enjoy the fallout. Back at what used to be her home, Crystal's panic turned into action. She stormed back to her car, ignoring Ryan's weak protests as she fumbled with her keys, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Jake thought he had won, that he had outsmarted her by running off to paradise with her best friend, but Crystal wasn't going to lie down and accept defeat. "I'm not just some victim in his game," she muttered, starting the engine with a roar. She had connections, people who owed her favors, people who could make Jake's life miserable if she wanted. If Jake thought stripping her of everything would break her, he was dead wrong. Ryan tapped on the window, looking confused. "Crystal, where are you going?" She rolled down the window, her face set with determination. "I'm not going to sit here and cry while Jake's off celebrating with Tiffany. I'm going to make sure he regrets every decision he's made." She revved the engine and sped off, leaving Ryan standing in the driveway, bewildered and unsure of what to do next. As Crystal drove, her mind raced with every possibility. She still had access to their joint accounts, or at least she had. Jake had probably emptied them by now, but that didn't mean she was powerless. She knew things about Jake, his business deals, the shortcuts he'd taken, the secrets he kept hidden from everyone except her. If she played her cards right, she could dismantle everything he'd built. Crystal pulled into a small cafe's parking lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She needed to think, regroup, and figure out her next move. But as she sat there, staring out the windshield, something clicked in her mind. Jake hadn't just humiliated her, he had humiliated them both. Crystal grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice, before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, it's Crystal. I need a favor," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man on the other end paused before chuckling. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again. What kind of trouble are you in?" Crystal swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the phone. "I need you to find someone for me. And when you do, I need to know everything, every move, every step they take." The man chuckled again. "Always the drama with you, Crystal." "All right, who's the target?" Crystal hesitated for a moment, then spoke his name with venom. "Jake, my husband. He's somewhere in the Caribbean, and I need to know exactly where." There was a pause, followed by a low whistle. "You're playing with fire, girl, but all right, I'll find him. Give me a couple of days, thanks. And when you do, I want you to ruin them both." As Crystal hung up, a new wave of determination washed over her. Jake thought he could destroy her and walk away without consequences. But he was wrong. She was going to turn his little paradise into a nightmare.